All right, today is Tuesday the 13th, and according to our syllabus, we're right here. We should be going over Chapter 7, which is what I'm going to do right now. I did grade your hands-on tests. I'm going to give them back after we get done with the lecture. What I did, there were 2 or 3 of you who actually did number 6, where you were supposed to put the check mark. You did it correctly. And there's 7 or 8 of you who did not do it correctly. So if you did it correctly, you got the 10 points. If you didn't do it correctly, you either partially did it or you put like a regular checkbox in there or whatever, well, I threw the question out. That makes sense? So with some of you, it'll say that it's out of 90 points, but some of the rest of you did a really good job on it. I mean, you did a real good job on it. You know, you did it exactly the way it was supposed to be done. So you got the 10 points. You know, and I wanted to do it like that so it wouldn't be a hindrance to anyone. All right? So, no one flunked, so that's always good news. All right. So, again, we're going to go over Chapter 7. This is my plan. I'm going to go over Chapter 7, probably do it in around an hour or so, and then take a break, very quickly go over Chapter 8 also. All right? Then give you your next assignment, and that's the one that's right here that says Lab Handout Responsive Web Design. And I'm going to give it to you today. It's not due for about a week. All right? It's not easy. Now, to try to make it easier for you, tomorrow is a lab day, but we're going to do 2 things. As we've been doing, we're going to do that Path of Light thing. All right? So for that yoga studio, hopefully you found that that's been helpful. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to create, I'm going to give you the code, but I'm going to have you key it in. All right? And we're going to create a 1-page website that's going to look really pretty bad because it'll have no CSS in it whatsoever. None. So it'll just look like it, boom, 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 boom. It just keeps going on the page. Then what we're going to do is rather than using straight CSS, we're going to sit there and pretty it up, so to speak, totally with Bootstrap. So you can see how to use Bootstrap. I think that will help you when you do the assignment. Plus, I think it will help you when you do the next test. All right? And so that'll be tomorrow, which is Wednesday. Thursday, notice there is a written Chapter 7 test. So that'll mean that also tomorrow we'll have to do a test review, which is good. I haven't written it yet. But we'll write that too. All right? And then Friday will be lab all day long. All right? If we have to, and I'll talk to you about this, maybe we'll reverse these. Maybe we'll Thursday make a lab and Friday we'll make the test. You know, we'll see how it goes. But I want you to realize that next Monday, the 19th, all right, I don't know how we're going to do this, but I would like it, ideally we'll have that one done already, but we might not. But I'd like next Monday to be for the hands-on the entire period. I think that you do better when you've got all 4 hours. You know, I've said this before, for some of you, that might have been the fastest day of the period. You know, fastest period of the entire semester. All right? So, just so you have some kind of an idea of what's going on. All right? So, again, I'm going to jump into Chapter 7. And Chapter 7 in your book, it looks like, starts on page 307. And there are approximately 615 pages in this book that we get to before they get to the appendices, etc., and the index and all that other good stuff. So we're about halfway through. 6 out of 14 chapters isn't halfway, but as far as pages, we're about halfway through the book. So Chapter 7, more on links, more on layout, and more on mobile. One thing, you know, you can look at it as being a good thing or a bad thing, but if your goal getting through this program is to get hired as a web developer, this may be the most important chapter in the book for you. Because what many places are doing is they're going with the idea of mobile first. So in other words, when they're building a website, they're building it first to work on a mobile device. It's much easier to take it and have it work on a mobile device and then make changes to it so it works on a desktop, laptop, tablet, etc., than it is to go the other way. All right? And we'll talk about some of the reasons for that, some of the other stuff that's in here. Now, We'll talk a little bit about relative hyperlinks. You already know what those are. All right, you did those on your test yesterday. In other words, you had your 5 HTML files, and those 5 HTML files were in the same, either in a folder or you just had them right on the screen itself. But basically, you didn't have to path to them. All right. If you had a CSS folder and you wanted to include that CSS file, and I should say this, I didn't take off for it. There's no way in heck you were supposed to make a CSS file for each page. You were supposed to make one CSS file and use that on every page. Some of you did that. Some of you did not. Some of you look like you took the CSS file and copied it 5 times. There's no reason ever to do that. All right, and actually that's really bad practice, because if it turns out that you have to change one of them and you forget to change the others or whatever, all right, you're going to kind of be hosed. A couple people did not create a CSS folder, period. You made the file, but you didn't create your CSS, okay? 1 or 2 of you said you had problems even getting your CSS to work, so even though you had CSS file or files, you still put it in inline. I'd rather have you do that, all right? And unfortunately, a couple of you, when you pathed to something, for instance, if you were going to path to your image didn't show because when you said source equals, you had to say images / followed by the name of the image. And you didn't say that. All right, so you may have lost some points for that, just so you're aware of that, okay? All right, we'll talk a little bit about sprites in here. Again, more about 3-column layout. And one of the easiest ways to get a 3-column layout, just so you know, and again, if you're working on this, you go, we didn't go over that, or I don't remember that, or I can't find it in my book. All right, then Google it. Google 3-column layout. I don't even know what that gives you, but someplace, if I say in here, 3-column layout CSS, all right, CSS, multiple columns, W3 schools, and they show a 3-column layout, and that was the biggie. You can use column count. If you'd have just said column count in your CSS and set it equal to 3, that'll automatically set your columns up to a 3-column layout. You were supposed to have a 3-column layout for the entire site, every page. Some of you did it on one page. It was supposed to be site-wide. That's the way it was supposed to look. All right. We'll also talk a little bit here about ARIA. And anytime you see ARIA, they're talking about people who have some kind of impairment. All right, in the past we've called them disabilities. We're not supposed to call it that anymore. I'm fine with calling it an impairment, but we all are impaired in some way. All right. I remember, talking to a friend of mine who's a mechanic. This is, I'm just telling you this real quick. And I was doing something on the computer, and he was like, I can't believe how you can do that. You're just not even looking, basically. Kind of like a person who plays guitar and doesn't have to look at the guitar. And I said, I can't believe you can fix my car, because I can't do that. So we all have things we're better at than someone else. All right. We also get into here talking about responsive web design. Your next assignment will have 2 parts to it. One part will be working on responsive web design. The other part will be working on Bootstrap. If you get this assignment done, or you'll make a really big dent into it, all right, then by the time we take our test next week, you should be pretty well set. You really should, because it's not going to be that different, the next test, from this next assignment. All right. So they talk more about relative linking. Those of you who sent me lots of emails yesterday, thank you. I do appreciate being kept on my toes. All right, and evidently I didn't send you everything. There was like a casita or something like that folder in there. It was all sent this morning. I apologize. I sent it twice, and what I should have done is I should have read it. All right, I'm getting emails as I'm grading the tests, and no excuse. I didn't pay as good of attention to it as I should have. All right. So when you talk about relative linking, it's relative to where you currently are. In other words, if I'm right here, it's hard to read, I understand, but if I'm under events and I'm in this file that's called festival, right here, .html, and I want to jump to where it's called canyon.html, okay, then what I literally have to say is / rooms. / means go up a level. So if I say / rooms / canyon, that'll get me there. And that isn't an HTML thing. That's not a web thing. All right. If you've ever done any kind of work where you've worked with DOS or anything where you've jumped around in file systems, you do that kind of stuff all the time. So .. means parent, means go up one level. Dot means where you currently are. All right. So when they're talking relative, that's what they mean, is relative to where you currently are. And they give some examples in here. All right. Here's relative to where you are when you're right there. That's the kind of thing we've been doing thus far. Then they show another example again. Rooms canyon. Well, with ours, it would be like CSS / styles.css. And here's another one, .. / All right. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. And the first hands-on practice asks you to go through and basically work with this file. And that's one of the things that I've sent you. So you should have all that. All right. The second one, the second example here on fragment identifiers, you might find this a little confusing. What that means with a fragment identifier is I'm on a web page. We've all seen this. You've got a web page that's a little bit long. And maybe 2 or 3 places on the web page, you've got a hyperlink that says back to top. And you click it, you jump back up to the top of the page. That is a fragment identifier. That's what they're talking about. Now, what confuses some people, they're like, well, can I do that and literally have it jump to a place? You know, so in other words, if I've got a website and that website has got 8 pages in it, and I'm on page 3, and I want to jump to page 6, can I put a fragment identifier and jump from one page to another page? The answer is yes. Not only can you jump to that page, you can jump to wherever on that page you want, as long as it's your page. Google's not going to let you jump into their site, or Amazon, so you can't jump to somebody else's site. But if you've got a website, or even multiple websites, you can jump from one page in one website to another page in that website, or another page in another website. And you don't necessarily have to jump to the top of it. You could put one of these fragment identifiers anywhere on the page as long as you own it and jump to right there. Does that make sense to people? It might really, so let's say that you've got some kind of a website that you set up that's a teaching website. And you want to teach someone how to do something. I don't know why, this just popped into my head, but you know, my wife does a little bit of this. But let's say you want to teach people how to crochet. And you've got about 5 or 6 pages. And you say, now click right here and jump, you know, and to show you a video. Maybe you're jumping to a part of a different page where that video actually is. And you can do stuff like that. And they go through in here what you have to do in order to be able to do it. Now, I didn't put this out there, but I think I mentioned it to you, and I've got it someplace, and that is that I created a site a while back. Jeez. Yeah, whatever. I created a site a while back on Mount Rushmore, and I had fragment identifiers up the wazoo in it. So you could jump all over the place. It was all one big page, but I allowed you to jump all over. All right? I think, again, it's another example where it's going to make more sense when you actually do it. All right? Okay, why don't some of my hyperlinks to fragment identifiers work? All right? Well, what the big thing is, if you've got a page that's not that big and you put like a back to top in it, it might look like you're not jumping, you know, way up to the top of the page because the page isn't that big to work to begin with. Plus, as we've already talked about, the other reason that it might not work is you might not have the authority to jump to the middle of somebody else's page because it's somebody else's page. All right? All right. ARIA, again, talking about this. Notice it says accessible rich internet applications. I have not looked yet at the test for Chapter 7, but I know one thing about Terry Felk Morris. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a question on there that asks what ARIA stands for. All right, not that you have to write it down, but it's one of those things you should remember. Accessible, rich internet applications. All right. So there's different things that you can set up and they show some of them up here. So if you want to make it as easy as possible, and you're typically talking about in here, not always, but you're typically talking about someone who's either blind or sight impaired. All right, and you're trying to make it as easy for them because they typically have a browser, if you've never heard these before, a browser that speaks to them. And these have gotten so much better over the years. Years ago, I had a student in my class, she was totally blind. All right, she was a nice enough lady, and she brought her dog with her, okay, all the time to class. But at the time she used a package, and you may or may not have heard of it, it's called JAWS. The bad thing was she'd be sitting there typing, you know, if she'd be typing like hello, and what, H-A-L-L-O, and you'd hear that, and it was driving the students nuts. They were talking to me about complaining and talking to her about it. I couldn't because she couldn't turn it down. She wasn't a young person, all right? She was 50-ish, and she didn't have that good a hearing, so she couldn't turn it down, so it's something we all had to work through, all right? But again, when you're somebody who's got some kind of an impairment, you want to make it as easy for them to use your site as possible. That's what this section is about. All right? Now, you may or may not have seen this before. Target equal blank. Anybody know by you know what that does without even reading up there? Does anybody know what target equal underscore blank does? If you don't put it in. So for instance, if I come in here, and I don't want to waste a lot of time today, but I do want to show you this. It's important enough to show you. I'm going to make a real simple web page. And I'm just going to put in here a head with nothing in it. And I'm going to put in here just a simple hyperlink. Oh, that's another thing too, just so you know, with at least one of you, and I don't know who did this, so I'm not picking on anybody. One or more of you left off beginning and ending head tags. One or more of you left off beginning and ending body tags. Okay? You don't have it in there, that's wrong. So you may have lost some points for that. Okay, so I'm going to put in here. Save it to the desktop. Again, very simple page, but notice when I click run and I run it, hopefully I didn't make any mistakes. All right, see the rank and home page. If I click there, your file was not found because it wants the HTTP on it. You may or may not be able to tell, I didn't change pages. I'm still on the page I was on. I should say I didn't change tabs, so there's no new tab. I'm still in the tab I was on. All right. Now, if I change that to this, and I put in here target equal underscore blank, just like that, and you say, well, there's no change. Well, watch. Notice I'm going to totally close this and try to run it again. Looks the same, but notice there's one there that says test, but now when I click on it, notice it opens up another tab. If you are ever going out to someone else's site, it is considered bad, what they refer to as netiquette, which is internet etiquette. It's bad netiquette to not put a target equal underscore blank, because you're giving people the mistaken impression that this is part of your site, and it's not. All right, so that's why you use the target equal underscore blank. All right, they go through and have you go through an example of it. Telephone and text message hyperlinks. I'm asking here, anybody ever gone out to your phone and asked for an address or a phone number of a place? You get it, and there's a little thing in there with a little phone icon that says call. You click it, that's what they're talking about here. You want to make that simple for someone, all right? If you've ever done this, when I moved to Lake St. Louis, one of the first things I did was I looked up churches, all right? And they had that in there. They had call, and they also had a directions thing, all right? And you probably have seen that. That's what they're talking about in here. So what we're doing is we're talking about really trying to make a complete website to make it as easy as possible for someone to use. Why should they, if they're looking on your site on their phone, why should they have to get out of your site and or maybe even write down the phone number and then key it in? If you can set it up for them so that they can click a button on your site, they're still on your site. All right, if they want to find out your hours or whatever. All right, the next thing that's in here are sprites, and they give you a simple definition of a sprite. It says it's an image file that contains multiple small graphics. And if you look, this is set up basically as a sprite right here. All four of these little things are set up as a sprite. And another thing to realize on here, and hopefully you do looking at it, they're using reverse imaging on here. So in other words, they've got white on a blue background. But when you highlight one of these, it becomes blue on a white background. You see a lot of that kind of thing. All right? This is not a great example. It's not a bad example. The only thing I would tell you is right here, I would have made this probably different colors just because, again, there's not a whole lot of difference between these. And if you've got somebody who's really terribly colorblind, that might be very hard for them to iterate their way through that site. All right, now we come to the 3-column layout. Again, I realize you had a little bit of this on your test, but this is, I would strongly suggest that you go through these exercises and really take your time with them. I know with some of you, probably, at least this is what I'd probably do. Geez, I just want to get them done. I'm going to start typing. At least read what it says before you start typing, because they really show you how to lay this out. So this is more old school, and what I mean here is with a navigation running down the side like this. It's not done as often today, but you know what? It might come back into vogue in the future anyway. It's like narrow ties, skinny ties. You know, I was going to throw out a tie once. My wife said, just wait, 5 years, it's going to be back in style anyway. She's probably right. All right. And when you do this, notice they've got the header stretching all the way across, and in this case, the footer's not. That's just a matter of taste. If you want, you can have the footer stretch all the way across here. This used to be, back in the day, you may or may not have heard of this term. This used to be referred to more than a nav section. It was called a frame. All right, you may have heard that. I know when I taught a class similar to this many years ago, literally what I had students set up was they created their own coloring book. All right, and what do I mean? Well, over here, they had A through Z, and they had different animals. So for instance, if you clicked A, then a picture of an alligator might come up over here. That kind of an idea. And frames used to be really popular, but they really were very hard to use the way they were set up because they were almost a separate document. They were very hard to use for people who had any kind of impairment. So it's changed over the years. So this is what they have you set up. Your navigation section is in there. All right. And you'll notice here, we're working with an aside. All right. There's your main area here. And you can tell, again, your navigation stretches all the way down, your aside stretches all the way down, and your footer is the area that's in here. And again, with the hands-on, it's one of the more extensive. It's 3 or 4 pages. All right. Next, on about 323, it looks like they talk about styling for print. This may not sound like a really important thing, but it is. There are people who will go out to your website that literally want to print out one, more, or all pages. Everything. And if you're going to do that, first of all, I mean, looking back even at that simple example we just looked at, this one right here, one of the first things I'm going to do right there is if somebody is going to print that out, is I'm going to make everything black and white. because otherwise I'm using their color cartridge, and I'm possibly wasting, a lot. The other thing is any place that's on here that has a hyperlink and you can see there's a bunch of them, I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to literally turn that off and just have it so it just prints the regular color. Typically what you're going to want to do when you're styling for print is you're going to want a white background, black text, and as few images as possible. You might remove the logo, you might remove everything, all right? Because typically people who are going to print it out, all they really want is the content, all right? You haven't done this, I don't think, at least so far. I could be wrong, but so far everything that you've done when you set up your CSS, it's been set up to be set up for the screen. And you haven't had to put that in, or probably didn't put it in, but one of the things that you can put in your link tag is media equals screen. Well, if you're going to do a media equals screen, okay, typically you'll also have a media equal print, and you'll have a separate CSS file that'll be just set up for printing, all right? And they go through on pages 323 and 324 some of these best practices. Again, hide non-essential content. It might be a real cool little picture of a squirrel, but if somebody's printing out your website, they probably don't care. And especially if it's intricate or whatever, they don't want to necessarily print that out. All right, so typically the information on there that's the most important is going to be the text. Configure font size and color for printing. I already talked a little bit about that. Some fonts, serif and sans serif, some of them are better for on the screen. Some of them are better for printing. All right. Control page breaks. You want to be able to control if it's going to print out over multiple pages where it breaks. So if you have a chart maybe in there that's really important, you might not want it to break in the middle of the chart, because it's very hard for people, especially if they're printing it two-sided, then they're constantly flipping it back and forth, type of an idea. All right, we've already talked about the pseudo elements, but there's other things. CSS 2.1 pseudo elements. Colon after, colon before, colon first letter, colon first line. All right, you may or may not remember this, but one of the things I told you on day one in here is if you go out to my YouTube channel, I created 3 presentations before the book even started. The third presentation, with all these different CSS pseudo elements, there are tons of them. All right, and I did a presentation where I presented all of them. So when you look on here, again, it's better. You still can turn off the coloring, but notice how much better it's getting. They've removed all the coloring from the background there. You may or may not want to even keep those pictures. Again, you might want to make all of that black text on white writing, but it still is getting better. And so they have you work your way through an example that goes through this. All right. Then they switch gears here starting on about page 328 to talk about the mobile web. And you may or may not have thought about this, but it's funny. They talk about things to worry about with mobile web. Okay? This is what they come to. Small screen size, low bandwidth, font color and media issues, awkward controls, limited processor and memory, functionality. I'm going to mention one that you can say it's in there, but I don't think it is. To me, the biggest thing with people working with mobile devices is, by and large, their battery power. And I don't know, everyone's different. My wife used to always laugh because I charge my phone virtually every night. And she's like, you're already at 80%, you should let it run down. She said it's good for it to run down, just like, I don't know if you've ever heard that. Every once in a while, you should let your gas tank go down to almost nothing and then fill it up, because otherwise stuff settles on the bottom. So I decided, okay, the next time I go into the AT&T store, I'm going to ask the guy. And I said, does it matter? And he said, not a bit. He said, you can let it run way down. You can charge it when it's at 90%. And either way, it's not going to matter one way or the other. All right. This was a guy who worked there, so I had no reason not to trust him. But again, the key thing is, maybe you've done this where you go out to a site. So if you decide that on your site, let's say Brady's going to create a site, and he's going to put a bunch of games on there. All right. So he creates a site, and Amin looks at it, this is really cool. He starts playing games before he realizes it. his phone, he's used half of his battery. And it happens. All right, so to me, that's the biggest issue. Okay, and sometimes it can't be helped. Because again, if the idea is you're creating a site, a gaming site that can be used on a phone or another mobile device, it's typically going to take up a lot of battery. And there's not real much you can do about that. All right. The other stuff, small screen size, well, you know this as well as I do, that the ability to pinch, and zoom in and zoom out on different things. What we're going to talk about in just a few minutes is sometimes you don't want to allow the user to do that. All right. We'll talk about how to stop that from happening. Slow connection speed. All right. I used to think that people, were very, I've always been under the idea that people are impatient, and I am too. All right. Then I thought, no, the most impatient people are people learning how to use a computer. But now I think that's not true. I think some of the most impatient people I've ever seen are people trying to use a mobile device. It's like this won't load. It's the old thing, and I've told you this before, but it's like, you go to an elevator. There's 4 of you waiting for an elevator. The next person walks up. What do? They press the button. It's already pressed, but God, they know that if they press it, it's going to open then. It's the same kind of way. I've seen people do this. What are you doing? Well, it's not loading, so I'm just basically going to reload. And you reload and you realize it was 99% done because it shows it to you, but then it starts to reload it again. All right. Font color and media issues. Again, stuff typically doesn't look as cool. Even this example that they just showed with the wildflowers probably isn't going to look as cool on a phone. All right. Awkward controls and limited processor and memory. It's amazing watching people. I watch, like my kids, they can text with their thumbs. And they can text really quickly with their thumbs. All right. And I can actually text. I've gotten to where I can text fairly quickly. Not that accurately, but fairly quickly. All right. So when you optimize for mobile use, this is typically what you're going to have. This is one of the reasons that you want to use a wrapper. Everything in there, because it's going to be one column. Maybe you've seen this already on different pages. All right. Again, if I go out and use my phone right now, and I think I told you I'm from Milwaukee, so if I go out and bring up the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, which I get online, and I bring it up on this machine, it looks much different than if I bring it up on my phone. If I bring it up on here, it's going to have a bunch of different columns in it, big pictures, and a bunch of other stuff. If I bring it in on my phone, it's going to be one column that's going to go all the way down. And that's typically the way that mobile websites are set up. Some of the things they tell you want to do, limit scrolling to one direction. If you are going to have people scroll, typically it should be up and down. It should never be right and left, ever. And that's whether you're using a mobile device or not using a mobile device. If you've got a website that's got a bunch of cool stuff on it, but it's way off to the right, you're going to find a lot of people are never going to even know it's there because people don't think of scrolling to the right. All right? All right. Use heading elements. Use lists to organize information. Avoid using tables. All right. Provide labels. Avoid using pixel units in style sheets. Again, this goes back to the idea. Remember, if you use px for pixel or pt for points, that's an absolute measurement. All right, so if you make something 36 point, you try looking at it on a phone, it's not going to work very well. Okay. Avoid absolute positioning in style sheets and hide content that's not essential. But that's the hardest one, believe it or not. I can't hide that. People need that. All right, they may or may not need it. All right. So they say here, provide minimal navigation near the top of the page. This to me is the key one. Provide consistent navigation. Some of you did a really good job on the test you just took, all right, of setting up, and Eric, I think you did this, and you did a really good job of it. You did like one page and you copied it over 3 or 4 more times. I think with some of you, what you might have done is you created your home page, all right, then you went and created a new page and you might have copied in some of it. Why not copy in all of it? Especially when you're taking a test, all right? But you want to be consistent, especially in the way you provide navigation. All right. Avoid hyperlinks that open new windows or pop-up windows. Same kind of thing we talked about before. It slows things down. All right. balance the number of hyperlinks on a page, optimize graphics. I'm not going to read this. This is one place, though, where it's very important, and if you didn't do this, one of those questions on the test said, how do you set it up for, one of the image ones was, how do you set it up for people who are impaired, and the other one is, what else can you do to help? That was 2 questions. One of them was the alt tag, but the other one was to add height and width. So if you did the alt tag, but you didn't do height and width, you only got 5 of those 10 points, or vice versa. All right? That's the idea today, designing for one web. But we really designing for one web, what ends up happening most of the time today is you end up doing mobile first. All right? So this is some of the stuff that you have to start knowing this. Okay? Well, if you have this, what's the difference between that and that? Well, that's pretty obvious. All right? If I can shrink this way down and still see everything, then it's been somewhat set up for mobile, even though that doesn't look like it right here. This hasn't been at all. All right? You just set it up. Even worse, if you set it up and you gave it a size that you said 960 pixels, for example. All right? One of the easiest ways that you can start when you're doing this, that you can start to set it up for responsive web, and it doesn't sound like a big thing, all right? But you use your image tag, and you say width 100% on all your images. Or you put it in your CSS, IMG, you put width 100%. What that means is, and it's a percentage, that means always take as much room as you'll give me on the system. All right? That's one way to start to set up for a responsive web. Here's other things that you can set up. There's a tag that's called viewport. You're going to have to get used to it. It'll be on your test. It'll be on your assignments. All right, looks like on 331 in the book. And here's some of the directives, and you can set one or more of these. So they've got here width equal device width right there. You may or may not be able to see that. It says width equal device width. All right? What that means is use all of whatever device I'm using that you can. So if it's your phone, use every bit of it that you can possibly use. Especially when you're working with somebody who's working with a small cell phone, all right? You don't want to set it up so, just use 70% of it so they've got some margin. They don't care a lick about margin, all right? Initial scale equal 1. All right, when you set that up, that basically says, be at 100%. Okay. And there's more of them on here. Like I said, they're discussed on here. And what's one big thing as far as doing this? Well, media queries. You're gonna be ending or adding some more CSS. Please listen to this. You don't have to look, but please listen. It's more or less custom. If you're going to have media queries, we're going to talk about what they are in a minute. But if you're going to have media queries at the bottom of your CSS file. Everybody hear that? Under everything else. And remember that when you're creating CSS, that if you do this, that's how you do comments, right? A lot of times people will do that, and they'll put a comment in here that says, media queries. And then they'll have a thing under here that'll say, for example, this might say, let's say you go from the smallest to biggest. So this might say cell phone. And you have a bunch of stuff here. Then you come down here and you say tablet. And you have some stuff down here. You want to make it as easy by just putting in a simple comment and delimiting that, as easy for someone to jump to it as possible. What you want to get is something that looks like this. All right? Notice that what happened is all those sprites that we had in there where you could choose things, they all went away. You ever done this where on your phone, or if you take the browser and you keep making it smaller and smaller, that if you've got a bunch of links at the top for navigation, they go away and you get those 3 little lines at the top of the screen? And if you click the 3 lines, that's when your menu comes back again. That's responsive. All right? So here's all the different media types that you can use. We've already talked about this. All means for everything. Screen, computer screen of the web page, print we just talked about, and they go through here and they start talking about this. This is about as close as we get in this part of the class to coding. Because what you're doing here, when you go through some of the examples, let's see. I know it's kind of hard to read. It says media only screen and max width 1024 pixels. Sometimes you set a minimum width and a maximum width. For instance, the minimum width might be 300 pixels, the maximum width might be 500 pixels. That'll typically handle any kind of cell phone, that kind of thing. All right. So you might set up a bunch of media stuff in here based on the size of the device that you have. All right. And that's what they're talking about. All right. Responsive images. I already mentioned this. Maybe it was max width instead of width, so I could have been wrong on there. So up there in the blue, max width 100%. All right. You can say height auto, but if you don't put that in, it's supposed to default to that. But the idea is, again, here you notice how big the image is. Here when you shrink it down, it's smaller. Here when you shrink it down to cell phone size, there is no image. Quite often that's what you're going to want to do. With this casita example that you work on in here, you're going to see some of that. All right. Now, and you may or may not know this, but just to tell you this very quickly, if I do this, I can simulate. That's about the size right there of a cell phone. That'll be about the size right there of a tablet. I can do that myself. But there are tools out there that are called emulators that will emulate that stuff for you. All right, there's add-ons that you can have for Firefox, or for Firefox, but for Mozilla, yeah, for Firefox, and for Chrome, and IE has them too, where you can run different types of simulators. All right, picture element, as it says in there, the source element is a self-contained or void tag contained with a container element. The picture element is one of several elements that can contain one or more source elements. So it's a holder, for lack of better words. All right. And when you look in here, here's an example where basically what we're saying is, okay, I'm going to have 3 different pictures. If they're looking at it on a desktop or a laptop, show this one. If they're looking at it on a tablet, show this one. If you're looking at it on a cell phone, show this one. So sometimes you do it with media queries. Sometimes you actually have 3 different pictures. You might say, well, that seems like a hell of a lot of work. You know, if I've got lots of pictures, yeah. But how important, I mean, if you're trying to sell a service, you want it to come across on your website in every medium possible, as you know, looking as good as it can look. And there's more in here. They give you some things on the bottom. It looks like on 341, it says that you can go and look at that, and they give you some hyperlinks. She does a very good job in this book of trying to give you other resources that you can take a look at. All right. So this is what I mentioned. Okay. There's iPhone emulators. There's all sorts of different emulators that you can use. In fact, if I go in here right now and write emulators to use with Chrome, for example. All right. Simulate mobile devices with device mode. Okay. Mobile browser emulator. So you can grab things that are free from the store, and there are things that you can actually use in here. All right. So when you get in here and you're bringing up a page, there's different places that you can click, and you can set it up to see how it would look, and it'll show you with a lot of these. It'll even say to you, iPhone 5, iPhone 6, iPad, Nexus 7 tablet, etc. So you can see exactly what your site will look like. I mean, when I say exactly, it's an emulator, but they're showing you pretty much the way it's going to look on one of these. All right. It's almost impossible for you to check and see how your site would look on every browser that there is, on every version of every browser there is, and then you start saying, you know, and on every device that there is. There are going to be so many. I mean, literally, the number of choices are going to be in the millions. All right. And as always, media queries and IE. Keep in mind that IE prior to version 9 does not support media queries. All right. Mobile first, we already mentioned. Again, the idea that when you start, the first thing you do is you design for mobile. All right. And the last thing that's discussed in the chapter, I know it's a long chapter, starting on page 344 and the last 4 pages, I will tell you, even though it's at the end of the chapter, all right, I know there's something on your next assignment, and there might be on your next test. Flexbox, which is what this is typically referred to as, is kind of an alternative to having to do float left, float right, clear float, and all that other stuff. All right, it's a fairly new concept. It's the last 4 pages in the book. I would strongly suggest that you read it. All right, it says you have used the float property to create 2-column and 3 columns. While the float is still common practice, there is an emerging flexbox layout that uses flexible box layout, and this is a really good site that's right here. In fact, I think this is listed on your next assignment. But if I go out there and click it, I think I've already got it open in the other thing. All right, but it says in here, flexible module layout, and it goes through it. There's, believe it or not, there's even a better one, and that is under CSS tricks, and I don't remember where it is, but it's in here someplace. This might be the quintessential resource on using Flexbox. CSStricks.com, it's called the Complete Guide to Flexbox. So if you type in, you look in your browser and you type in CSS Tricks Flexbox, you'll find it. Plus, like I said, it'll be on your assignment, so you don't have to worry about it. But it's a really good article. All right, and they go through how you do this. The idea, again, is you are replacing the floats with something that starts with flex, typically, flex dash something. All right, and I told you I was only going to take an hour, so I'm going to let you read this. But again, the idea is you end up getting something that looks more like this, and you don't need to use any floats. And I will tell you that with some developers, they love this because they hate floating anything. Because it's so hard to float something and then clear it, float again, etc. And you're constantly doing that and have stuff line up and whatever. It's much easier to do using Flexbox. All right, so that's it for the chapter. When we come back, we're going to take a break now. It's 8:57. Let's have a nice break. So we'll come back at 9:15. I'm going to try to go from 9:15 to 9:30 and jump through Chapter 8 very quickly with you. No tests on Chapter 8, no homework on Chapter 8, but I want to show you a little bit about tables. I've shown you some of it. I want to show you some more. So I'm going to build a real quick table for you in about 15 minutes. All right, so let's come back at 9:15, please.